Hello, my name is Chris Morgan. I'm a director at John Gilbert Architects in Glasgow, talking about retrofit. I think the starting point for all of this is the need to significantly reduce carbon emissions and fuel poverty. And retrofit is great because it's a really good way of doing both of those things at the same time. Two sections of the talk, one talking a little bit about why retrofit's a good idea, and the second section talking about some of the ways that we can improve the way we do retrofit generally in Scotland. Retrofit is good because we know that we can't new build our way out of this problem. It doesn't matter how energy efficient new houses are. The problem is the existing building stock, and that needs to be renovated regardless of what we do with new buildings. And if we're going to renovate the existing building stock, we might as well do it as well as we possibly can. The good news is that it is easy to make an old building, most old buildings anyway, every bit as energy efficient as a new building. And that's not commonly understood, but it's certainly the case. So if you compare, for example, knocking down an old building because it's energy efficient and building a new house, in comparison, it's about a sixth of the price to get a very energy efficient version of that same house. So in other words, you can get 6 highly energy efficient refurbished houses for the price of one new build. So if we're being effective and fair with the money that we're using, it's a no-brainer. The other reason is not an energy reason exactly, and it's to do with the fact that in Scotland, the construction industry uses half of all the resources that Scotland uses. It also accounts for half of all the waste that Scotland generates. So obviously, if we can retain old buildings in place and refurbish them, that's going to make a significant difference to that amount of waste and resource that we're using up. So that's why hopefully retrofit's a good idea. The next bit is about how we can improve retrofit. We as architects design energy efficient new buildings and renovations, and we're doing passive house renovations as we speak. But we also unusually study buildings once they've been built. So we study them while people are living in them to see what really happens. And what you find is that it's not what we thought. So some of the things we've learned, one of the main ones is that the system that we use to comply with building regulations is a thing called SAP, and it's what generates the EPCs, the certificates you see next to the boiler usually. It isn't hugely accurate, but because we all have to comply with it, the industry as a whole works to SAP. It does what it needs to do to comply with the regulations, but that's not the same thing as in real life designing very energy efficient, comfortable, warm houses. So there's a mismatch there, which is a problem. One of the things we see a lot is that when retrofit projects are done, that there's nobody with an overview of the design process. And it means that things can coordinate in unexpected ways, which can be problematic. And there's also often no independent quality control of the workmanship, and that's often going to be a problem. So we need people with an overview, and we need independent quality control of builders and of workmanship. And a third issue is that traditionally architects design buildings, builders build them, and then we just walk away, and it's up to people to use their buildings as they wish. But what we're finding is that people use their buildings very differently. And if we engage with people, we can actually make a big difference. We can improve how buildings are used and how comfortable people can be in them. So I think there's a sort of skill set that needs to emerge in which designers and builders actually help people to use their buildings better, and you can make enormous savings that way. Another problem we commonly find, one of the most common problems we find, is that we've taken a cold, drafty building and we've made it warm and airtight. And that exacerbates a number of existing problems. One is to do with moisture. People generate a lot of moisture in buildings, baths and breathing and drying laundry and showers and so on. And that moisture, if it's not dealt with properly, can create other problems, dust mites and mold and condensation, which have knock-on effects on things like asthma and COPD and respiratory health. And another issue is that a lot of modern materials, they do a thing called off-gassing. They off-gas the chemicals that are in them. They dissipate into the air. So things like carpets and new paints and polystyrene, all of these sort of synthetic materials can actually create quite unhealthy gases in the air. And in both cases, what we need to do is ventilate properly. We can reduce the amount of off-gassing by specifying different materials, but one of the best ways to deal with it is just to ventilate buildings properly. And that's not usually done in renovation projects because it's not an energy efficiency thing, but it needs to be done for people's health. And that same moisture that's causing problems for air quality can also get into the building itself and actually cause not just mold, but decay. And what we're finding is that energy efficient improvements are actually leading to decay of buildings in some cases, which is obviously a bad idea. And we find that this is more the case in older buildings. Older buildings worked in a different way. And when we put a sort of modern mindset approach as to how they should work in, it basically doesn't work very well. So we need to understand better how old buildings work. And finally, there's an issue to do with how buildings look. Unless your building is listed or in a conservation area, there's really nothing to stop us just putting polystyrene and render over everything. And I think that that is not a good solution. I think there's a lot of beautiful buildings and towns and villages in Scotland that we don't want to lose. We don't want to lose how they look and how they feel. And there is a risk that that's what will happen. And we need a more creative and I think a more thoughtful approach to how to insulate buildings to keep what makes Scotland beautiful, basically. I hope that's useful. I hope it's interesting, and I'll be available for conversation.